to me like a wink or something.
Yep, just waiting for Facebook to pick up the feed.
Facebook to go ahead and censor
establishing satellite connections and go live. We are live.
All right, we are live here with Degree 45 podcast. I'm Covered Cup Productions here with Jeremy with Weekly Narrative. We're here with Danielle with That's Just My Opinion, and Adam Kokesh with Adam versus the Man, and also Libertarian candidate for 2020, leading Libertarian candidate going into 2020 for not President of the United States. Thank you, Adam.
My pleasure.
Thanks for coming, Adam. Really appreciate it.
So for those that don't know you on our podcast, please explain a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're at right now, and kind of what's going on.
Well, who I am is relatively unimportant compared to the line in the sand that is being drawn with this campaign right now. And I'm really glad you didn't introduce me as someone who is running for president, because while technically I am running for president of the United States, I am running against the presidency. My platform is the peaceful, orderly, and responsible dissolution of the entire United States federal government. While most politicos, you seem to have an aneurysm when they hear that, most Americans, when they hear that, go, sounds like that would be a pretty good start. And I think it is a good start on the way to a free society without coercive government, when we get government localized all the way down to the community and individual level. So the end goal here is not to leave us, as we will have with the end of this term, with 50 independent states, 5 autonomous territories, and up to 562 sovereign native nations, but to dissolve the federal government in order to lead a global trend in localization, eventually dissolve the state governments, get government down to the county level where it can transition to nonviolent means of social organization, and dissolve further down to communities and individuals. So my platform is this one executive order. When people introduce me as someone who wants to be president, I go, whoa. I don't want to be president. In fact, the first thing I'm going to do is resign. And so it's much more accurate to say that I'm running for not president, or turning the presidential election into a referendum on whether or not the federal government should be allowed to exist at all. So with this executive order, we are going to pardon all prisoners in federal penitentiaries who are there for victimless crimes. We are going to declare the federal government bankrupt, of no authority, and the Constitution invalid. I am going to resign from the presidency to become custodian of the federal government in order to be the bankruptcy agent overseeing the dissolution process in a way that liquidates the assets responsibly, repaying the American people, the true creditors of the American government, not the people who own the paper debt that is a false debt, which is really a form of intergenerational child abuse, forcing your children to pay for things that they never had a say in through the national debt. It is illegitimate, so we are going to, in bankruptcy, disown that and acknowledge that the only true creditors of the American government are the American people, and they will be repaid as federal government assets are liquidated. We are going to make Social Security solvent and more secure than it would be from government as a public institution that is no longer part of the government. We are going to spin off the VA. And when you give the VA to the veterans and end the drug war, you are not going to have 20 veterans committing suicide every day. And ultimately, the more local government is, the more in line it is with people's needs. So when you get government all the way down to the community level, it's really everybody gets what they want. People in San Antonio shouldn't be writing laws, or people in San Francisco, Nancy Pelosi, shouldn't be writing laws for people in San Antonio. We are too good for this government, and we don't have to be united under one government to be united in American values. This is the final American revolution you've been waiting for.
Holy smokes.
And that's no teleprompter either. That wasn't even a teleprompter there.
Yeah, it was great.
So no central power whatsoever when it goes down to at a county level, like you're saying. So there will be no county answering to a higher government whatsoever. It would be every county in a sense, or every community maybe in a sense, kind of for themselves.
Well, they would be autonomous. See, when you say for themselves, that has a really negative connotation, I think, for a lot of people, that it's, every man for himself. And it's like, right. No, every human being getting to interact peacefully with other human beings with respect for their rights and mutual benefit in peaceful cooperation that benefits everyone.
Okay.
That's capitalism.
Right. Yeah. And with that, some people may dictate what freedoms they can have versus what other people feel freedoms they can have. For example, somebody could feel that a certain freedom that they have can hurt a neighbor possibly, right? Or maybe or affect somebody else. How do you kind of draw the line to where somebody who describes their freedom as something totally different than maybe what somebody else does, in a sense, I guess, where you could come into a problem? I hope that's a good question. I hope you got an answer for it, which I'm sure you do, and probably been asked that before.
Well, I think it's a good question because a lot of people will ask questions like that. And I'm glad that a lot of people are asking questions more like that. But I will say the wording of it is terrible. And the wording of it is steeped in a lot of imprecise language and propagandistic implication from what we've been conditioned for so many years by government to think of freedom as something that's imprecise, whereas freedom actually really means something very specific. Freedom is what you have when no one is forcing their will on you. Freedom is the ability to exercise your rights limited only by the rights of others. So when I say I have the freedom to punch you in the face, I'm lying. I'm misrepresenting what freedom is. That is not something that I have a right to do, that I am free to do. I may be free physically, that there's no one holding me back from punching somebody in the face, but I don't have that right. And when people are asking those questions, as poorly worded as they may be, it really begs us to ask definitions. The Dalai Lama was once asked, what would he do as president? And he said, I would call things by their true names. And I think that's really very powerful, because just defining terms allows us to get to the heart of a lot of these issues, where we see the commonality that we all have as human beings who want to be free, who want to have our rights respected, who want to love and be loved and interact with people in ways that enrich our lives and enjoy the human experience to its fullest extent. When we use imprecise definitions, we're really falling for a lot of the premises of propaganda and statism that would keep us from defining terms and keep us in the realm of vague emotional associations rather than precise understandings of these ideas.
So
yeah, and last, go ahead, Danielle.
I just wanted to jump in with a quick question. I know that immigration is dealt with at federal level. You're wanting that to be dealt with at county level, or are you just wanting us to kind of break off this whole build the wall call by our president and just let everyone free flow in and out? What would the immigration stance be as far as that goes? Do you understand?
Yeah, well, if I may start answering your question with a fundamental philosophical premise here. The idea of open borders and closed borders is kind of like pro-choice, pro-life. It's a really silly, semantic, unnaturally divisive argument. People have all sorts of different preferences for how they want people to associate. And we all have a temptation to be central planners. We all want to be able to tell other people what to do and where to live and who to live with and things like that. And the most important part of the paradigm shift towards freedom is that while we don't give up those preferences, we give up on the idea that we can violently control other people based on those preferences. So when it comes to borders, we're talking often in the government debate on immigration, how should we use violence to violate individual rights of freedom of movement? And my answer is, you shouldn't do that at all, period. The only legitimate borders are private property borders. Government borders are fundamentally illegitimate. They are lines drawn on a map by politicians in circumstance of history based on people fighting over violent control over territory, as opposed to what is an actual honest recognition of what is true property rights. If I own, and by the way, I own property in Arizona. I own 11 acres, Freedom Farm in the mountains in northern Arizona. And right. I have a fundamental human right to decide who's allowed on my property and who isn't. You don't have a right. You and your friends don't have a right. You and a bunch of voters and a government don't have a right to put up a line 100 miles away from my property and say, well, if people don't have our permission, they can't cross this line and enter your property. That's absurd. And it doesn't work fundamentally.
With national borders, let's say we didn't have them, that doesn't mean Mexico and Canada, who are our neighboring countries, are not going to not enforce their laws of having borders. So we go over there or want to go over there or anything like that, they're going to enforce the law, but they're allowed to come into the United States freely, is what you're saying?
Well, you're talking about, when you say Canada and Mexico, you mean the government of Canada and the government of Mexico.
Exactly. Yeah.
Governments aren't very good at doing anything except, like, hurting people and stealing stuff.
I've noticed.
But they still exist in these countries, even if you ran for not president of the United States. So then what do we do about, like I said, Canada, like Mexico?
They just have an influx of people from Mexico that just come in for whatever reason. Some I'm sure are good people, but and they're coming in from all over and are pouring over. But we can't go over there. Can you see where that could maybe be a problem in a sense?
Why can't you go over there?
I can, but you can. It's just like why I can't go to. I mean, look what happened to that guy Otto in North Korea, who came back with his brain pretty much mangled. These countries have different. It's their governments, like you said. It is their governments.
Well, also,
I'm not going to stand a chance.
You guys raised a couple issues I didn't get a chance to respond to, and I don't want to be too flippant because I really am concerned about the Canadian invasion. I do have it in my executive order that, some people say, what do we do with the nuclear arsenal? Before we dissolve the federal government entirely, I will nuke all of Canada, even my family members and relatives who are there. Yeah, so we're not going to have to worry about Canada.
I blame Canada.
I'm half Canadian myself. My mom was born in Montreal, but don't tell anybody. I was born in San Francisco, so I'm still legally American.
And you're related to Ted Cruz. You might be related to Ted Cruz, maybe.
So, yeah, I'm still more American than Ted Cruz. But when it comes to these questions, you keep saying we. And what you're doing is endorsing this false collective. You are saying that I am not an individual. I am a member of a collective first. That the government's borders are more important than my private property borders. I'm willing to sacrifice my private property on behalf of the collective. And I reject that idea entirely. The only legitimate borders are private property borders. So I don't have a problem with Mexican. Like, I live in Arizona. I want to be able to hire Mexicans. I want to be able to hire people from wherever in the world. We get the cheapest labor. One of the scary things about government immigration restrictions, violent restrictions on freedom of movement, is how much it hurts the world economically. And you all know how important free trade is, and free trade includes the free exchange of labor, that you are able to seek employment wherever someone is willing to employ you. If we got rid of government barriers, government borders, just as barriers to the free flow of human labor capital, global productivity would double. That means quality of life doubles globally, or how much we have to work to provide this quality of life gets cut in half. But that's one of the arguments from effect. Fundamentally, this is an ethical argument. You as a human being have a right to travel anywhere on earth you want, with the only restrictions being other people's property. And government is not a legitimate property owner because it has only claimed territory through theft and conquest.
But government can put me in prison for a very long time in these other countries that I decide to go to freely. So I can freely go to these other countries, but there's going to be consequences for me. Should there not be consequences for them to come here?
I think the question that Cut's trying to put together is, how can a libertarian community like the United States, if we had this society that you're looking at, does this fit into a global world, or do other countries have to change to fit, to kind of mesh with this new kind of society?
Did you just call America a libertarian community?
No, the one that you want to see, the one that we want to be.
Okay. Well, first of all, two wrongs don't make a right, and one person doing something that's violent and unethical does not justify someone else doing something violent and unethical unless it is in immediate physical defense or self-defense or defense of someone else. So I'm not saying that the whole world is going to be ethical when America decides to step up its game and be a lot more ethical and be a lot more freedom oriented. And ultimately we don't have to. We can set an example for the rest of the world, and as we did. I mean, I like to think of this as the final American Revolution. And what's so exciting about this is that we get to repeat two very exciting elements of the first American Revolution. We get to show the world forward in freedom. We get to set an example. We get to lead the way. But we also get to do so by, once again, overthrowing the largest empire the world has ever known. And that's a pretty exciting thing to say. We get to be a part of that this is our generation's opportunity as Americans.
Do you
think governments... Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Mine was just going to be, do we really want to? Do we really want to overthrow the #1 superpower in the world? Do we want to open its borders and potentially increase crime rate, as Sean Meehan mentions in our comments? I mean, there are different consequences that do need to be addressed. This isn't just like a utopia. I mean, all due respect, I love the idea, but realistically speaking, I don't think it's a realistic idea.
Okay, I don't think keeping the federal government going at this point is realistic. I mean, just looking at the debt numbers, just look at the monetary policy and the way that money is borrowed in the federal budget, it's nowhere near realistic to say the federal government is going to last forever. We're going to keep it going. But you mentioned the potential rise in crime. What you're saying is, like, we can't end the mafia because there might be a rise in crime. Like, we can't stop crime because there might be a rise in crime. Government is the biggest criminal in the world by far. Taxation is theft. Government is the biggest thief in the world. When you kill someone as a soldier, that's murder. It's not murder because a politician said it was okay. You know, when police violate your individual rights, when they pull you over unjustifiably, when you get arrested for victimless crimes, they are the criminals. We have come so far as humanity. We are living in the most peaceful times in human history right now. It is really exciting to step back and appreciate how far we have come, that you are less likely today than ever before to be subject to violence at the hands of another human being. We have embraced near universal ethics. Don't hit, don't steal, don't kill. But we make this crazy exception so that you can ask that, you ask that question with a straight face. What about the rise in crime? No, government is the biggest criminal. We are getting rid of the biggest criminal. Taxation is theft. Killing people in the military is murder. When police arrest people for victimless crimes, they are the criminals. Let's end that crime. Let's get ethics to be universal and include government, not just us as individuals, because it's the unethicalness of government that is holding us back as a species from our potential. Capitalism is interacting with people peacefully by choice in the free market. And whenever you have a free market, people are able to realize that potential. And there is this hypothetical ideal of a whole global economy that is free of coercion, where there's no violent interference by any government in your right to trade with anybody else. And anytime you introduce coercion into that equation, you hold humanity back from our potential. That's what government is today.
I have a quick question as far as the size of government and then dismantling government. Would you, so I understand anarchy means no rulers, no masters, is pretty much what anarchy means. And it has a negative connotation to it because the left thinks socialism is a form of anarchy, which makes zero sense to me, but that's their thing. And then libertarianism, as far as I know, means really minimal government.
That's
not wrong?
That's not correct. Some people will present it that way, but if libertarian means belief in freedom, freedom is what you have when no one is forcing their will on you in any way. So freedom is what you would have in a voluntary society in which all human relationships are voluntary. So if you are a libertarian, then you believe that, you know, whether you call something government or not is irrelevant. A lot of libertarians will say, well, you know, government can only do this or only do that. But those are people who call themselves libertarians, not who really understand it, because the libertarian answer to government is you can have as much as you want as long as it's voluntary. At that point, I would say it's not government. According to my definition of government as a territorial coercive monopoly, if you had a voluntary ethical government, it would cease to be government. It would need those adjective modifiers in front of it to say voluntary or non-coercive. So libertarianism really is a philosophy of ethics, first and foremost, based on the idea that you own yourself. As a free, beautiful, independent human being, it's unethical for anybody to claim ownership over you. It is the reality of being an independent consciousness in your own physical body that you.
Ron Paul, who you know of, Dr. Ron Paul, who I think we all respect in a sense, he ran for president, not president, and he was a libertarian. He ran as Republican, but I think he's the poster boy for libertarianism, as far as I'm concerned, as what got me into the libertarian movement. And he was going to run for president, and I want to believe that if he did get in, he would have audited the Federal Reserve and would have done something to go after the central banking system and a lot of problems with taxation that's going on in this country. I really believe that, but I don't think he would want to demolish the government as a whole. I think he wanted it to shrink. I think he wanted it to be
That's actually not true. It's actually not true. I was at a speech recently in Acapulco, at Anarchapulco, and he said that we should get government down to zero. So what makes a libertarian is that you embrace this ethical concept, that you believe in ethics being universal. You don't make exception for an institution because it's called government or being run by the people in charge. So like you wouldn't call me a statist because my policy is localization and I want to dissolve the federal government, and then I'm going to allow for state governments to exist until they get down to the counties, right? That's my transition. Ron Paul, when I interviewed him in 2011, when I had my TV show on RT and he was a member of Congress, I asked him specifically, you've described yourself as a voluntarist. What does that mean? And he said it's a world in which society is voluntary. Now, he is correct to point out that if you were to get government I hate to say back to the Constitution because that's not historically accurate, but if you were to get government to look somewhat like a constitutional government, to somewhat acknowledge the restraints and whatever limits of the Constitution, of course it's silly. It's like saying expecting the mafia to follow a code of ethics. But if you could do that would get us to a much more voluntary society, or much closer to a voluntary society. But Ron Paul's end goal is not a constitutional government. He's definitely more forward thinking than that. And he sees the ideal of a stateless voluntary society the same as I do. Where we would disagree is on the political way of getting there, whereas he thinks you can get a consensus to, dial government back from here to exactly here at the Constitution. Not here, but we're going to get a national consensus to get right here, right back to the Constitution. I don't think that's realistic. I think you're more likely to get people on board, and my market research and my experience has shown that people are much more likely to vote for localization. And we don't have to argue with people who don't care about politics or philosophy or government about what kind of government you should have. Just, hey, you want this at the local level, the community level, as long as you're not imposing it on anybody else, and people in your community are free to leave, then we don't have a problem with that.
I want to kind of try to shift this a little bit to culture. I think the idea of anarcho-capitalism is, I like the idea, and I think it would work well if everyone was on board with the idea of individualism, right? Everyone has the ability to own their body, the rights of their means of production, everything they produce. And right now what we're seeing is kind of the opposite of that, the rise of collectivism, and it's turning into an uphill battle. How do we reconcile the need for freedom and individualism with the current kind of uprising of collectivism, socialism, these anti-individualist ideas that are coming out of college institutions and mass media?
Well, I would say if you really think that socialism and collectivism are on the rise, you're probably watching too much mainstream media. You're probably watching too much ideologically driven left-right media that's advocating for different kinds of statism that's operating based on fear. You need to support conservatives because be afraid of the liberals, or vice versa. And it really is kind of a silly fear-mongering tactic that I think is falling short of reality, where most people are seeing through that. Most people are getting past that. But I wanted to address something else you said there about, freedom only works if everybody gets it. And that's absolutely not true. It's that in every single relationship ever, nonviolent relationships are better than violent relationships. So, for example, let's say that you have a group of people in a village, in a community, and the next village over, is coming over to attack. And you are, just a leader in your community, and you want to get people together, and you go, look, guys, it's really important. We need to defend our community. We can do it. We have the resources. There's these assholes coming from next door. We're going to confront them, we're going to kill them, and we're going to stop them in their tracks. Now, if that's your objective, how do you go about that? Are you going to be better off going to everybody's house and saying, join me or I'm going to shoot you? Join me or I'm going to shoot you? Join me or I'm going to shoot you? Or are you better off persuading them to join you and fighting and wanting to fight because they believe in that cause? Mm-hmm. So the answer is, even when there's an externality, even when there's someone else coming in to the situation who's unethical, the best way of dealing with that is by bringing people together ethically.
Our military, though, is persuaded, though. It's a voluntary thing. It's not a draft. It's persuasion through. We're going to give you a GI Bill. We're going to pay for your college. We're going to do all these great things for you, so you can go take care of the war profiteers and big government guys. And all. Yeah, it's voluntary. People are volunteering.
For the taxpayers who fund it.
It's not voluntary for the taxpayers to fund it, but it is voluntary for me to sign up for the Army or for the Marine Corps or vice versa, and to go overseas and kill people for a cause that I may or may not believe in.
Right, and if you're already going to steal money to pay for people, yeah, you're better off just paying them rather than forcing them. And yeah, if you can bribe people, that's to kill. It's better than
But what's to say it doesn't happen over again? If you're in a libertarian society and that one community does start using bribery, what if they start using bribery?
Okay, so this is where your hypothetical is really short of reality. Because in order for that to happen, you understand, governments always require consent, right? They require a certain buy-in from the population. Even the greatest tyrannies require at least a certain amount of acquiescence from the general population. But in order for, like, say we achieve a stateless society, if you believe in free markets, you believe in capitalism, then you believe that that's going to make things better, that people are going to be happier, safer, more productive with freedom and capitalism than with tyranny. And we get to this state, as you say, we get to an ideal libertarian stateless society. What's going to happen if some asshole now wants to be government again? Well, in order for that to happen, they're going to have to stand up in front of a bunch of people at some point and say, hey, remember when we had government? Remember taxes? Remember the police state? Remember the surveillance state and wars and politicians? Wasn't that awesome? Let's do that again. Now,
well, look at the people we have as elected officials, though. It's going to happen.
I'm not going to say that that's never going to happen, but the reason that that is unrealistic is that we're talking about the age of the internet. We now have a perfect social memory. No one is going to be able to twist history so bad to say that the era of government is better than the era of freedom that we would be now experiencing in your hypothetical.
I think if people want to read up on history and read up on government, yes, maybe. But I mean, again, we are in that generation of the Tide Pod, of the snorting condoms, of Hillary Clinton versus a reality TV star for president of the United States, of the Nancy Pelosi's and the Maxine Waters and Aleppo and all these great things. I mean, you kind of look at it, and our society, it cares more about watching the royal wedding at 2 o'clock in the morning, getting 5-star reviews and talking about it on National Enquirer magazine, and what's Kanye saying and what's Kim Kardashian saying. I think I think we live in a society that would rather have government, that would rather have control. I don't think you're going to have, and you did say earlier that socialism, I'm watching too much mainstream media. I go to these protests to interview the left and ask them questions all the time. And I'll tell you what, there is problems. There is some violence that's going on certain parts of the aisle, both on the right and on the left. But I see an extremes on both sides, and I do see problems. And I don't know. I don't see everyone. And if everyone does get together, then that's kind of a different thing in itself, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I'm kind of all over the place.
That links back to what I was referring to earlier, and that what I was trying to say with the cultural stuff is that right now we see a rise in tribalism and the lack and lowering of the idea of meritocracy. So the people who believe in meritocracy, they're the ones who would be more inclined to go for the anarcho-capitalist society where, okay, I can work and earn a lot for myself and have my own property. But you have these tribalist groups who are saying, we're identifying as a group, Black Lives Matter, this and that. And the interesting thing is, and maybe you can help clear this up a little bit too, the people that I talk to at these protests, they say almost identically the exact same thing that you're saying right now, but they identify as communists. And I think what I've been able to identify, the only difference between what you're saying is, what the society that you would like to see is, and what they want to see is the individual property rights. That's the only difference. Aside from that, it sounds like you guys want the exact same thing, but it's related to this lack of meritocracy and increase of tribalism. Can you make sense of that?
That's like saying, you guys sound the same, and it's like you want the exact same thing except the total opposite. I mean, they're not talking about private property. They're not talking about free markets. They're not talking about freedom and capitalism. But hold on, you guys threw out a lot there, and I want to go back on some of this, because you say we see, we observe, and I don't mean to discount your very real observations, but if you zoom out just a little bit, you put this in perspective. First of all, I go, well, we're seeing a rise in collectivism. Yeah, because you're watching the mainstream media, and you are, as you said, looking at extremes. I'm not looking at extremes.
You just went upside down. Oh, there you go. All right, we're good. All right.
Yeah, I had an alarm I had to turn off. So I see. I look at the bigger trends. You know, I see a society that is overall more empowered. I mean, you want to look at the voices in the streets. You want to look at the loud fringes. You want to look at the extremes. You're going to see extremism. You're going to see trends in extremism. You're going to fall for fear-mongering because they all want you to be afraid of something. And what the reality is that we effectively get more intelligent every day with technology, with communications, with the internet. And you might say that people are less inclined to critical thinking. People are more dumb. And I say, prove it. Where are the statistics? You say there's a rise in collectivism. Do you have any national surveys to back that up where, you know, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how collectivist are you today? Well, I'm feeling about a 6, Jim. You know, and I was feeling a 5 yesterday. This is a real dramatic rise in collectivism. The thing is, if you look at the longer term historical trend, Thomas Jefferson, would you rather, if you were going to be on a game show and you had a chance to make a lot of money, and it's a trivia show, right? Would you rather have Thomas Jefferson sitting next to you or a 5-year-old with a smartphone? I'll take the smartphone. It
depends. If I have Thomas Jefferson sitting next to me today, everyone would call me a racist.
That's a good point. Slave owner.
I would need the yeah, exactly. I would need the 5-year-old, and then people would think I'm just cuddly and trustworthy.
No, then you're a pedophile. Obviously.
And then I'm a pedophile too. Well, it depends if I'm a Hollywood star or not.
I want to throw a quick, straightforward question in there. It might have been answered indirectly throughout this conversation, but straightforward, I want to ask. You know, how do you plan to make measurable progress with this approach? You know, how do you approach someone who is going to behave unethically with ethics? How do you install this, you know, because they're, like he said, we got the Tide Pod eaters, but worse than that, we have murderers. We do have these criminals. How do you meet we can't just expect everyone to behave ethically.
Well, sure. You know, it's a good question, but again, like, you know, I'll just start with the perspective. You say, what do we do about murderers? Stop hiring them to kill for politicians in the name of the military and the police. 90+% of the violence done in the world today is done in the
Chicago.
Name directly. What?
I said it's in Chicago.
Oh yeah, right. Well, okay, so of the remaining 10% of the violence in the world today, 90% of that is directly caused by government. So you get the drug war, you get the war on poverty out of the way, and all of that private incentive for violence goes away. We're talking about getting down to a world where violence is 1% or less than the current violence in the world. So already we've gotten rid of government. We have gotten rid of 99% of the violence in society. So how do we deal with the remaining insignificant violence? And again, I would use the example of how do we come together to deal with these things, right? You know, we're going to develop better mechanisms of public safety in public safety organizations, in insurance companies, in private security, and dispute resolution. But you asked a more fundamental question, right? About like, how do you deal with unethical people? And I want to really address that because you are going to still have that challenge. In the long run, so in the short run, you can come up with better mechanisms, and they're going to act like government. When someone does something violent, people in a community, a private security company should be able to arrest them, detain them, and forcefully isolate them from the rest of society when they're a real threat. Now, again, the scale of this on which it is necessary is so tiny compared to what it is today. I can't predict what communities are going to come up with as better mechanisms. We might not need anything. We might go back to a sort of posse model, you know, if we had today's technology. In the more high-tech world that we're facing in the next few years, we're looking at something more like high-tech insurance companies that are going to be able to hold people accountable. In the long run, though, to get really to the fundamentals of this question, what it takes is showing people And ultimately, that is how the market works. The market actually is quite amazing in the way that it favors nonviolent relationships. If you have a choice of doing business with two people and one's violent and one's not violent, you're going to do business with the person who's not violent. So people who are violent are going to be sort of forced out of the market or disadvantaged appropriately in the market, and they're going to be forced to adapt if they want to compete economically. Even more fundamentally than this, let's look at the root causes of violence. Violence is a psychologically driven phenomenon. It's not like some random physical thing happens, you eat something, it makes you violent. No, it is something that is driven by prior trauma. It is something that is driven by mental health deficiencies. And one of the things that's so important about getting rid of government is improving the healthcare system. One, getting rid of government empowerment of big pharma, pushing unsafe pharmaceuticals when many psychedelics would be much safer treatment for mental health issues like schizophrenia, depression, PTSD. MDMA is an incredible therapy that's been kept illegal for that is effectively a cure for PTSD in most cases. You wouldn't have veterans committing suicide at the rate they are, again, with those technologies being available. But just the fact that we are going to be so much more prosperous means that we have so much more time to deal with mental health issues. A lot of people look at the state of America today and go, we're crazier than ever. We're pushing pills and kids are on Ritalin and it's a pill popping culture. And it's like, yeah, and we screw it up in a lot of ways because of government, because of those regulations, because of those artificial incentives that government creates. But at the same time, you go, we have more capacity than ever in terms of time and energy and resources to take care of people who are mentally ill, to get them that treatment before they become violent. And that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to, the empowerment of humanity when we get government out of the way more than anything else.
Well, one thing I remember when we talked last time is you did mention that it's more of an evolution, not a revolution. It's an evolution. And he said it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. It's not something that's just, flip of a switch, federal government shut down, everyone's happy in a libertarian utopia. It's going to take some time. There's going to be hiccups in the road along the way, correct? Along those lines, something along those lines.
Absolutely. But there is one thing it's funny because this is about the presentation that I just did here at the Unconvention in Omaha, is about the effect of technology and how it's accelerating all these dynamics, rendering government obsolete. And I just want to present this to you guys as a way of thinking about the scale and the scope and the timing of the change that we're experiencing. And I'm going to say 20 years as opposed to 10 years, because 20 years is sort of this time period we can look back at from 1998 to 2018 of the maturation of the internet, of it starting to come into relevance in our lives and pervasively being applied and changing everything. We can see this change that has occurred in the last 20 years globally is roughly equivalent to the change of the 200 years prior to that. And the change of the 200 years prior to that is equivalent to the change 2,000 years prior to that, and 20,000 and 200,000. The scope of change of the human experience driven by technology is exponential, which means that the change that we have experienced over the last 20 years, we are about to experience in the next 2 years.
Moore's Law.
And then we are going to experience that amount of change again in 2 or 3 months. And then we're going to experience it again in a matter of weeks.
Wait, are we interviewing Ray Kurzweil? Who's this again?
And then days, and then hours, and then seconds. So it is quite useful.
So you're saying 20 years? You're saying 20 years, or you're saying it's something that's going to happen rather sooner than later?
I think with or without any libertarian activism, government is going to be down to about 5% of its current relevance in roughly 10 years. So we're coming to a tipping point of understanding, of realization that freedom is not only ethical and righteous, but it's better for meeting human needs by every metric imaginable. We are coming to a tipping point where people have less trust of government and coercive social institutions than ever before. Like I said, when I go out and talk to people about dissolving the federal government, the most common answer is, sounds like a good start. More than ever, people are expecting fundamental radical change that is keeping up with the change in technology that's driving so much of the shifts in society that are really rendering government obsolete already.
Is there one good thing you could say about the president of the United States that we have right now, Adam?
He has a very natural skin tone just around his eyes.
Okay.
I want to
How
ask
about policy-wise?
Okay, I'll let you answer that.
How about by policy-wise? Any policies, any ideas, any things that he does that you're like, you know what, that wasn't a bad idea?
I like how he's taking credit for ending the Korean War.
Okay.
Donald Trump was not elected with any significant paradigm shift, except perhaps in America's role in a relationship with mainstream media. And I think that was a very positive thing. But, like any politician, he's taking credit for the work of, people like you, so many other people like Alex Jones and the Young Turks, who really drove an independent media revolution that got people to trust government less and less. So what do I have to say that's nice about Donald Trump? I mean, I could say, yeah, it's nice that he's cutting taxes, but he did that as an excuse to make it look like he was cutting taxes when he was creating a tax windfall for states and didn't cut federal spending at all. And you guys are smart enough to know that it doesn't matter how much they lower taxes. If they keep spending the money, it's coming from somewhere, coming out of the American people. So I'm sorry, I got Zach here who's organizing this event. Is it time for me to get pied? I have to get pied. I'm supposed to get pied in the face for this event. So
can we get that live? Can we get you pied?
It better be tasty.
Is it like right now, Zach? They're coming. They want.
It's almost to you, and we'll throw you in whenever you're ready to come in. So.
Well, I don't know how much longer do you guys want? You want to get the pine on the interview?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Yes. So this is
We
really
need to go out
fun.
with a bang at least.
Joint event interview thing here. All right.
It's not really an interview.
This
This is just a hangout.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes people get pied in here. It's all good.
I'm excited now. This is just like really exciting.
All right, yeah, this is fun. So I'm at an event called the Unconvention in Omaha, Nebraska, being hosted by the Roads to Freedom Foundation, and this is one of the fun things they're doing as a fundraiser to support the event. And so I'm about to walk into a room where, so I was in this room. We started this hangout in the room where I gave my talk, and it was empty after I finished because everybody just ran away. But then so they're in the main hall now, getting ready for a steampunk concert, and I volunteered to get pied in the face as part of this fundraising effort. So I don't know. I keep hearing like cheers coming from this room, and so I have no idea what I'm walking into.
Is that your favorite state, Nebraska? Say yes. You gotta say yes.
Which state is my favorite is like asking which of my children is my favorite, and the answer is I like my dog.
Like my two kids. I love my main child just as much as I love my other two kids.
I'm doing a live interview. So here's Alex Brissett, just got pied.
Yes, hey everybody, I got pie in my face.
So I don't know if I can hear anything from you guys now.
The bid is up to $13.
What?
There's that.
$13 for Daryl? For Daryl. For who?
Tim Hagan agreed to speak up high.
It's too bad that
The treasurer of the
they don't
LLC
have the technology to mute him so we can chat while he's getting pied in the face.
The LNC, for everybody who's angry at the LNC, Tim's your guy.
All right.
He's willing to jump in front of that LNC hatred bus.
Well, so we're doing a live auction for this pie now. Uh-oh.
Is he gonna get pied?
I hope you guys like. I don't think I can hear anything you're saying at this point. If you ever,
okay.
This gets boring at any point, you just cut this. But I'm having fun. You can see the room.
We're commentating. Adam Kokesh is about to stand up to the media here. Take a pie to the face. Only here at Degree 45 podcast.
Only see it here.
We'll only see it here on Degree 45.
$60 going twice.
Come on, you're mad at the LNC. Let Tim take the pie for it.
All right. But hey, what's your name, man? You started this. What's your name? No, you want to give me a hand? Yeah, I don't want to get pie on my suit. You want to pie him for me? Yeah. All right. No, hey, Noah's gonna do it for me here. Hold on. Hey, Noah's gonna do this for me.
Okay, great. Come on, brother. Yeah. Come on, youngster. There it is right now. Come on. You guys going? Okay, come on out here.
If he liked government, he would have been able to got another suit through taxpayers'
Give
money.
him some instructions.
This is Daryl Perry.
Hey, Daryl.
Don't listen to him. I need to get down lower. Yeah, you gotta take a knee.
3, 2.
Gary Johnson.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Hey, Noah. Thanks, buddy. Good job.
All right.
Virtual high five.
Do we want to address some of the comments? Do we want to look at some of the comments and maybe answer their questions while it's going on?
Hi, everybody.
Now you recognize me. Hey, guess what? Guess what?
Scandal.
I got the fucking libertarians pieing each other. And you didn't give us any ponies.
Oh my god. I almost had that guy at my college a couple years ago.
Come on. 30, that's 30. I love it. Who goes 40? 40 Who got 40 right there? Who goes 50?
Who's got some comments here.
$75.
Whipped cream. The only
Somebody's got $50 there.
I don't know. There's ideology. For some reason, I'm not seeing all the comments.
So, I don't know if you guys noticed, but there's this is actually part of a steampunk costume party that I'm underdressed for because we have a steampunk band going on later tonight as well.
Are they pieing you? Are they gonna pie you in the face?
What?
Yeah, I don't know where. I think I'm last in this lineup, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know who's in front of me except Daryl right now.
Run it like a dictatorship and tell them you're going next.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so I can get back to an interview with pie on my face.
Nebraska. Wow, we've got South Carolina.
So this would be the time for any serious policy questions you might have about how we're actually going to manage dissolving the federal government. Because I've got all my answers memorized anyway.
I've got if you can hear me, Adam, I got an interesting question for you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, hit me.
I want to know how the Libertarian Party is going to recover from the last election season and Gary Johnson and the image that the Libertarian Party has right now.
By nominating someone who is both principled and presents a pragmatic platform like myself.
True candidates right there, ladies and gentlemen.
See, David and Carla, you can be the one to throw the pie.
I get to be there. Yeah. I'm in for 20. I'm in for 20 to be the one. No, they already.
Oh, here's another 20.
But I get to be the pier with this one.
Are there any taxpayers there?
No, we don't pay taxes.
Taxpayers.
Okay.
No taxpayers. Oh yeah, give Adam the pie.
Noah take mine. No, Noah took mine. Noah took. No.
Yeah, here we go.
Buy this one.
I'm gonna get
Oh, you want this
I want
one?
to deliver
I'm
it.
sorry.
No, I'm
This one.
delivering
You
it to
got it.
Daryl.
Adam's the man.
All right.
I love it. Grab the pie.
Adam versus the pie.
And I only had to pay $20 for this one. All right, here goes.
Ready? Is this the move?
Put it to himself.
Oh, we need a committee meeting before we can deliver this pie.
Usually how it goes.
We should yell William Wallace freedom.
We want to support you. Come on, Carla, help me support Adam. Okay.
We're morally supporting you.
So you want to like, run up with me?
This is Team Pie Daryl. Go.
3, 2, 1.
Oh, I got my son.
Yeah, it's like a
Oh,
Stormy
no.
Daniels movie now.
Oh, no.
There's a Stormy Daniels reference we were all waiting for.
The man who's running for not president in 2020, Adam Kokesh.
Definitely a Stormy Daniels.
Right now, Kyle here, the doctor here.
That's pretty good.
Is he here? Is the good doctor here? $50 for the good doctor. If he's not here, no worries. Who can? Is he here?
Are you next or you're last, Adam? Are you?
I'm up now.
Okay, here we go.
Not president. Last time I checked, Donald Trump is president, which means he's currently not president. So does that mean you won? So you can hit the not president in the face with not a pie.
My picture.
Take a raise for this? Should I take the suit off? I already like half piped myself here.
We'll do that now, and I'll give the doctor. They have to get your face. That's $60. I love it. $60. There we go.
All right.
Who will go $75? $75.
I am.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, make sure we get a good view of
This
this.
is a good angle here.
Getting ready.
Okay.
See how much he's worth. How much is a libertarian presidential candidate worth?
After this interview.
Non-presidential candidate.
Well, he's got to get president before he can become non-president first.
Right.
Who will go $125?
You're gonna have to get that dry clean.
Oh, getting a little closer. There he is. All right, we're good.
I'm gonna hang up on him. If he goes out of camera and he gets pied, I'm hanging up on
He'll
him
be in
immediately.
here. This is gonna be. This is one way to get campaign donations.
Too close there.
No.
Anyone can go to $25.
Pick us up.
Not how we are.
This is the worst. This is gonna be the worst anticlimactic ending.
I know.
Does anybody know what song?
It's like the ending to the new Deadpool. Did you guys see the new Deadpool?
No. He's not.
Died.
All right. Dr. Kyle, you are the one who's the most money.
You got pied already?
Wait, hold on. Yeah.
Anyone going twice? At $10, $201. There we go. $201
So, well, if we can't see him,
twice.
let's talk about.
I think. Hold on. We can't even hear ourselves talking with all that going on. So I'm gonna drop him.
Can you guys hear us? Just see if us say yes. You could hear us.
No, there's too much shit going on in the background.
Yeah.
Oh, there he is.
Adam.
Oh, Adam, we can't see you. You gotta angle your phone. You gotta angle.
Oh wait, we gotta get.
There you go.
Okay. Can you see yourself? Are you? Is this cheating? Wait, make sure they can see you. Ask her if they can see you.
Carry it on your camera.
Thanks, bro.
$21 for a pie. But please, there's more.
Well, now we that's serious balls, but
Yeah, that wasn't worth the wait.
Great. You took a pie today. That was so awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, Adam's doing his thing. I think we should let Adam do his thing.
Stormy Daniels Libertarian version.
All right, I'm dropping Adam.
All right, Adam's gone. Thanks, Adam, for coming on.
Thanks, Adam.
Bye, Adam. That was pleasant.
That was good. That was good. Sorry, you guys did have the craziest ending there, but we got to see the pie to the
dumbass
face.
with his fingers in the lens.
That was.
I was like,
oh God.
I don't know. That was.
Oh God, the whole show's breaking now.
What's happening? What happened?
No, it's just the
flat.
video.
Oh yeah, it just shows a picture.
I have to play around and move all this around. Oh, now he's back.
I guess I still need All right.
We'll keep that
Let me click this
picture
button
up
here. Where is
of
he?
him.
All right.
Now cuts a pug. This is
now cut the pug.
this is just burning down. There you go.
All right. I guess you guys.
So we were calling this the libertarian version of Stormy Daniels with that pie on your face.
Oh, that's low. That's low. All right.
Well, hey, we wanted.
Policy.
Yeah. Are you?
We were talking about something, weren't we? Before the pie.
Before the pie. Yeah. One thing you liked about Donald Trump politically. I don't even like to say the word politically because he says he's not a political person, and you definitely are not a political person.
He really wants this out of you, Adam. He really wants you to say something nice about Trump.
I'm just trying to get something out of you. I feel like you and I, Adam, would agree on so many things, and we would disagree on some core concepts, of course, or else we wouldn't have had. It's not fun if we just sat around and agreed with each other all day either. But is there one thing you could say that you like about any policies whatsoever, or policies he said he was going to do and hasn't done yet?
I like the idea of draining the swamp, but he's kind of done the opposite. I think I'm the only one who's actually proposing anything platform-wise that could fairly be described as draining the swamp.
But do you think? Would you say his draining the swamp though? You can look at as an evolution. It's going to take some time.
He's filling it up faster than he's draining it. No, of course not.
I think finding out former sitting president with wiretapping and things like that is pretty crazy. Going after some former presidents for some pretty crazy shit's pretty nuts to me. If anything happens, I'll be blown away.
It's a good thing I'm not in charge of the criminal defense system in this country, or you'd be in jail right now. Whoops, there's no campaign promise.
Well, it hasn't happened yet. I don't know if it will happen. To be honest with you, I want it to happen, and I don't think it'll happen because I think it's just so crazy. If we ever got to see that, like Obama or Hillary or George W. Bush or any of these guys get thrown behind, Bill Clinton get thrown behind bars for the crazy shit that they're saying, if they connect them to like the Seth Rich and they connect like the whole Benghazi thing and
we just got demonetized. Good job. We
just got demonetized?
Because you said Seth Rich.
Oh, his name was Seth Rich, though. Damn it.
Speaking of demonetization,
I'm all right. Are we back on with Benghazi?
He's not going to say anything good about Trump. Cut. Just give it up. Real quick, Adam. I want to. Tell us about where you see social media and technology going. I know you're on Steemit and you're a big purveyor of the idea of moving to Steemit. What is it that makes Steemit and these new platforms? Because all these YouTube creators are looking for something new. What is it about Steemit that makes it so superior to YouTube?
Well, I mean, bottom line right now, I get paid more from a single post on Steemit than I do for an entire month of posting on YouTube. And if I can, just briefly, my personal history with YouTube, I had a TV show for 4 months. in 2011 on RT. And at that time, I had been building my YouTube channel up. And when I got canceled, I decided to really focus on online, on podcasting, on YouTube videos. And at one point in 2013, I had about 100,000 subscribers, and I was getting like bare minimum. And this is when I was doing like 10 plus videos a day, 5,000 views a video. And that was like if I posted a mistake, like 5 minutes of black silence, it would still get 5,000 views. Now I have 230,000 subscribers, and I get 500 views as my baseline for videos. That's how bad I'm censored on YouTube. People who are following me, people who say they have signed up for the alerts, they don't get them.
I noticed that too, because I followed you since I was in college when you were doing when Mitt Romney, well, yeah, it was Mitt Romney, and I saw you with another guy talking to some crazy lady in New Hampshire who loved Mitt Romney, and you kept telling her it was a police state. I think the guy said he was a former cop.
Hey, I caught up with her recently. I think you and her have something in common. I think she's a Trump
here we go. She's a Trump supporter? You know what? If she's a Trump supporter, she has no idea. Mitt Romney and Trump are not the same on any level, except I know where you're going to go. They didn't shut down the government. They didn't drain the swamp or anything like that. But they are very different, Mitt Romney. And I don't think Trump's you can't say he's an establishment candidate. He's never had political office before. And Mitt Romney's been a politician his whole life.
Trump can never be bought, because he's been owned by the banks for a long time. He has always been in the bankers' pockets. He's always been in the mainstream television networks' pockets. He has been a product of the establishment. To say that he is not an establishment candidate is to say that you have no idea when propaganda kicks you in the ass and lies straight to your face and says, Donald Trump is anti-establishment.
I wouldn't say he's anti-establishment. I'd say he's worked with politicians for a long time and he gets it. But I'd say he's a businessman at the end of the day. He is a negotiator. He knows how to deal with these politicians.
I agree.
And the mainstream media.
But he's not an establishment candidate.
He's not an establishment candidate. I can't say he's anti-establishment, but I can say he's not your typical. I mean, the guy's never served in the military, and he's never had political office. He's different than any other president we've really had in modern history.
Right. He's a big government Democrat pretending to be a Republican. He's the greatest trick the Democrats ever played on the Republican Party. They fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. And a lot of the American people did too. And it's really sad.
Hey, Adam, we had a question from chat. Somebody wants to know how you define the right.
A right. Well, a right is obviously a construct based on.
Sorry, the political right, the group. Yeah.
Oh, the political right.
Philosophically, they said.
Philosophically? Well, see, from my perspective, what I think of the right as, I don't really use those. I don't use those terms left and right very much, except to refer to the old paradigm, the old party's false left-right division in politics. So, when you look at I'll give you a couple different definitions that I kind of use in referring to that. The main one is what we get from the Nolan chart. You guys know what the Nolan chart is? The world's smallest political quiz. Okay, yeah, it's great. Yeah, exactly. So it's it's like a diamond. Is square on point, and there are two axes of measurements of how much you believe in freedom. And you answer a series of questions. This is why it's called the world's smallest political quiz. And they measure how much you believe in personal freedom and how much you believe in economic freedom out of 100. So if you score a perfect score on both, and you believe in personal freedom 100% and you believe in economic freedom 100%, well, those intersect at the top, you are a perfect libertarian. If you believe in economic freedom, but you don't believe in personal freedom, right? That puts you all the way on the right side. You go all the way up to the right, but you don't go at all up to the center. You only believe in economic freedom, but no personal freedom. If you believe in all personal freedom, but no economic freedom, that puts you on the left. So in terms of actually making sense of it spatially left, right, then the extreme left and the extreme right are defined by people who believe in only economic freedom or only personal freedom. So that's a hypothetical, abstract, absolute. If you're a conservative, you believe by definition in economic freedom and not personal freedom. But the definition of the word itself, and I think a more general term that's appropriate.
I consider myself a conservative, and I believe that as far as socially, I don't care what people do in their bedroom. I don't care what drugs people want to do. Yep. And I'm fiscally conservative as I can be. I do pay taxes. I do allow them to steal from me, but I consider myself fiscally conservative. And as far as social construct or social issues, I don't really care. I don't care what people want to do as long as it doesn't affect me.
So you're not really a conservative. I mean, I identify as a transgender purple unicorn dragon, but just because I believe in universal basic income doesn't make me a socialist. I mean, you can play with these definitions all you want, but if you actually define conservative, the dictionary definition is someone who believes in preserving existing social institutions, someone who is against change or against progress. And I'm definitely not that.
Well, I guess I just gave my definition of what a conservative is then.
I think that points out a good issue, is that nobody knows what these definitions mean anymore.
The dictionary.
I want to ask you a question. I want to challenge you here. What is your definition of conservative?
My definition of a conservative is someone who wants to...
You apply that label to yourself and you don't even have a ready definition.
I don't have a ready definition, but as far as what conservative is to me, as someone who is fiscally responsible, who takes care of themselves, whether it be financially or whether it be through health or whether it be through family protection, doing what they need to do as an individual through freedom, as long as they're not hurting somebody else. And as far as socially, same thing. I don't really care what anybody else does. I just want, as long as it doesn't affect my money and what I do, which again, I pay taxes, so I know it sounds like it doesn't make sense because it doesn't, but that's the best definition I can give, is to, and it's so hard not to use the word conserve in the definition, but that's pretty much.
That's not a definition. Like the word definition has a definition. Definition has a meaning. That's a description. And actually what you're describing is a lot more libertarian than anything that fits any actual definition of conservative.
I always say I'm like a right-leaning libertarian because I'm also in a purple unicorn.
That's probably more precise, at least. But you see, this is a big part of the problem with government propaganda is that we don't define terms. I mean, going back to the Dalai Lama, first thing you would do as president is call things by their proper names. If I were to ask you and give you the world's smallest political quiz and actually put you on a realistic scale that measures where you are politically on a conservative, on a liberal, on a libertarian metric system, you would definitely be a lot more libertarian based on what you just said.
Yeah, and I identify myself as a right-leaning libertarian. I don't think conservative has a negative connotation to it. Just like it's kind of been, just like you say, the word anarchy has been misconstrued through the media and what anarchist means. I think conservatism sometimes gets a bad rap. Like if I say I'm a conservative, automatically I'm also a racist and a misogynist pig at the same time. It seems like in today's day and age. But
so hold on, can I ask you another question about your beliefs there, Cut? Because
yes, sir.
I'll put my sunglasses. Don't call me sir. I was a sergeant. Screw you. I work for a living.
Yes, drill sergeant. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, right. There you go. If you're not a libertarian, if you're a right-leaning libertarian, when is it okay to use violence against peaceful people?
When is it okay to use violence against peaceful people? Yep. I don't think it's okay to use violence against peaceful people.
Then you're a libertarian. That's it. You're straight up libertarian. Any modifiers.
But you can ask that to a Democrat and say the same thing, though.
Sorry, what was the question there?
My question?
I was going to say you can say that to a Democrat, though, and they'll probably say the same thing.
Well, if they apply it consistently, then they'll have libertarian policy. But if you say, when is it okay to use violence against a peaceful person? Someone who believes in taxation would say, well, when they're making money, it's okay to take their money from them. When they're buying a product, it's okay to take money from them at the point of sale. When they're smoking a plant that I don't like, it's okay to point a gun at them and lock them in a cage. When someone is conducting a business where they haven't paid their licensing fees, it's okay to forcefully shut them down. Those are all examples that most conservatives and liberals would say are, okay times to use violence against peaceful people. Whereas a libertarian says, universally, ethically, it is never okay to use violence against peaceful people. So if you believe in that core assertion, that's what fundamentally makes you a libertarian. And that's why I think more people are libertarians than they realize. But when you just think, well, let me see, I believe in ethics, I believe in morals, I believe in principles, I believe in respecting individual rights, I believe it's never okay to use violence against peaceful people who aren't violating anybody else's rights or property. When you take the time to think that out and apply it consistently, you go, well, geez, I guess government is unethical and illegitimate, and I'm a libertarian.
Adam, I have a question, and it's important. Where's your stance on abortion? Because you're talking about violence against people, who aren't deserving of it. Where do you stand on abortion? Because, as a conservative, I am entirely against it. And I want to know what your stance is after hearing you say that you don't like violence against peaceful people. And I would consider, the Democrat Party up into the Democrat platform party. And I know you don't identify as Democrat, but they believe that up all the way until birth, basically, you can abort. It's a ridiculous notion. Where do you stand on that, since you believe that you should not cause violence to peaceful humans?
Yeah, it's a very important question for any presidential candidate, because I can stand before you today and with absolute confidence tell you that I will never have an abortion.
Saw that one coming.
Well, hold on. It's 2018. I think Bruce Jenner's haven't celebrated. Is all confused at Father's Day, Mother's Day, right around the corner.
But furthermore, I will never stand on an abortion either. You ask me where I stand on abortion. I will not. I refuse to stand on an abortion. Okay, that's a serious question. I'll answer seriously, because it is an important one, and it does get to the heart of the philosophy as well. When you say that an abortion is ending a human life. And I think that's the whole pro-life, pro-choice divide is, again, it's really stupid. It's like this false dichotomy of labeling and polarizing and making a wedge issue out of something that shouldn't be. First of all, my position is government should have nothing to do with it. Government has no right deciding this issue, period. End of story. Because government has no right to exist in the first place as a coercive monopoly that's based on stealing from people and false property claims. So if we are going to address the problem of abortion, and it is a problem, it is a failure, it is an ending of a human life, we have to do so ethically, right? So right. A lot of people who fall on the pro-choice side of it try to say that it's not
my choice.
No, they say it's not a human life. And that's bullshit. That is, they're just trying to argue, no, human life starts at conception. You see an independent human life, that is a human life. That needs to be respected in the analysis, no question about it.
We agree on something.
We all agree.
Yes, I mean, that's sort of like, I don't have to deny reality to justify any position here, right? The next thing is you also have to acknowledge that a woman, the mother in this scenario in a pregnancy, also owns her body and is an individual human being. And you have this apparent conflict. And the question is, what principles do you apply to this conflict? So when I see you have two interests in position, right? If a woman wants to have an abortion and you assume a child doesn't want to be aborted, you have two people who are individual human beings who own themselves, who have this apparent conflict. Now, the other thing that we have to acknowledge in deciding how to deal with it socially is to acknowledge that there are times when, no matter how pro-life you are, you have to acknowledge that it is medically, ethically appropriate to end that life, that it is the compassionate thing to do to kill a fetus. That's what you are doing when you have an abortion. You are killing an individual human being. And if you are doing that to save the life of a mother, when it is unquestionably a medical thing, there are people who will try to deny that as pro-lifers, and I think that's insane. I think that is a wholly other violent way of forcing a woman to risk her life for someone else's. And if you believe in privacy, you have to say that if a woman is going to make that decision, her